It is actually a myth that you make a lot of money.
Okay. Why is
I'll
that?
give you a simple example. You know, there are 2-3 common stories that people hear in real estate. My father bought this land
Yeah.
at 10,000 rupees.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. अभी तो वो 10 लाख का हो गया.
शहर इतना बड़ा हो गया कि अभी तो जमीन शहर के पास आ गई या शहर जमीन के पास आ गई. 10,000 rupees is now worth 1 crore. 1 करोड़ रुपए का जमीन हो गया. दिस इज व्हाट पीपल से कि अरे वाह क्या क्या इन्वेस्टमेंट किया है. अरे भाई आपके फादर ने जब ही वाज 20 years old तब इन्वेस्ट किया था. उसके होके 40 साल हो गए. आप मैथ्स करके देख लो कितना परसेंटेज रिटर्न आया. द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया यूज्ड टू डिसाइड at what price a company can go public.
Is it?
Yes.
Why?
There is something called the Controller of Capital Issues of India.
Okay.
CCI.
Okay.
दिल्ली में. आपने अपने कंपनी का आईपीओ करना है तो सबसे पहले तो एक एप्लीकेशन भरो, उसमें पूरा फाइनेंशियल्स डालो, फिर इसका वैल्यूएशन करो, ये करो, एंड देन यू गो टू द मिनिस्ट्री.
Okay.
Ministry will take its own sweet time. And they will decide what is there was a formula on the basis of which they will decide at what price your company
No,
can go
taking
public.
time is fine, but how can someone else decide at what price?
That is how it was.
Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of our podcast series. Today we have with us Mr. Srinivasan. He is the CEO and MD of Kotak Alternate Asset Managers. Welcome, Srini.
Thank you for having me here.
So, Srini is what can I say? Jagat Srini. The entire financial markets, anyone will kind of address you as Srini only, right?
Correct.
And I remember when we first
That is
met.
supposed to be my age-defying tactic.
And I remember when we had first met many eons ago, you said you are the only Srini with a W in the name. So
Correct.
that is another defining
Yes,
factor.
you have to be different. You have to differentiate yourself. Otherwise, Srinivasan is a very common name.
Yeah,
it is like, in investment banks, if you trip over a carpet, you will fall over 3 vice presidents. It's like that. When you go to South India, you will get so many Srinivasans. So how do you differentiate yourself?
Yes. But you incidentally are from Delhi, right?
I'm a Dilli wala Madrasi, as they call it from Delhi. So I'm a Punjabi at heart. So I always tell my clients when I negotiate with them, my name is Srini. You have a choice of negotiating with a South Indian or a Punjabi. आप संभाल लो जी.
So Srini, you've now this will be what, your 35th year in financial markets?
Yeah, 1990 is when I started.
So 35th year. So we'll talk a little bit about how has been your journey, etc. But before we delve there, so Kotak Alternate Asset Managers काफी भारी भरकम नाम है, and since I'm part of the group, I know you run the largest private fund management franchise in India, of India for India. But little bit for our listeners, what exactly does the company do?
Actually, it never started off with this sort of idea at that time. In 2005, 2006, I had done about nearly 15-16 years of investment banking, and I had gotten tired of that. I said, मेरे को अभी कुछ नया करना है. So I was told कि आप एक real estate fund क्यों नहीं शुरू कर देते, because FDI अब तभी open हुआ था real estate के लिए. I had no idea what a real estate fund is. And so you do some more inquiry, homework. अच्छा ऐसा भी कुछ होता है, क्योंकि मेरा पूरा तजुर्बा was to have bought my home in Bombay, and buying a home in Bombay means whatever you earned in the previous 15 years goes into that.
Yeah, correct.
So that was the only real estate experience I had. But anyway, that's how we started. Then as time passed, we realized that some of the big global names that you hear of, like a Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle, you studied their business models and you realize what are all the things that they do. And as the India market sort of kept on evolving, throwing new opportunities, we felt we should be able to do something similar in India for India. And that is how the idea sort of developed over time.
This was 2006.
2005, 6, that's when we started. So, but the idea really, the germination of idea really started around 2010, I would say, after the global financial crisis. Because in the global financial crisis, you read these headlines, Solomon Brothers have gone bankrupt and so on and so forth. Then you say, ki, bacha kaun? Right? Then you see all these guys are there. Then you say, okay, what do they do? And so a lot of inspiration from some of the big global names. Also, I guess because when we had the JV, we had a JV with Goldman, and Goldman is a fantastic name, and we learnt a lot. I learnt a lot as part of the JV with Goldman, and I thought
This was Kotak Investment Bank.
in the Kotak Investment Bank.
Yeah.
So why not? So one thing led to the other, and I guess we were able to do the right thing. So what it means for your retail investors, I would say, is that we manage private funds, which we raise from the global institutions,
Okay.
like let's say an Abu Dhabi Investment Authority or a GIC of Singapore, or what you may read in the press as sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. मैं अपने लैंग्वेज में उनको गंगोत्री कहता हूँ,
Okay.
क्योंकि जो FII के नाम जो आम तौर पे आप सुनते हो, whatever you hear, they also get the capital either from these institutions or from their home market retail clients.
Okay.
तो सबका पैसा वो इंस्टीट्यूशन से ही आता
So
है,
these would be
तो वही है गंगोत्री.
These will be your mega large kind of funds, right?
Yeah,
Let's say
so they're all, each fund is not less than $500 million.
500?
million dollars. तो $500 million के नीचे कोई फंड नहीं है मेरा. तो
No,
billion
not your
dollars,
fund.
800
The
oh, those,
Yeah.
for example, if you take something like, let's say, state of California has something called the CalPERS, California State Employees Retirement Systems.
Yes.
तो retirement pension
Yeah, no,
fund
I
है.
heard CalPERS, it's very large.
$380 billion है उसका.
$380 billion. Wow.
Correct. तो ऐसे बहुत है. You know, and they're all more than $200-300 billion.
$380 billion will be roughly 10% of India's market cap.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow. And that is just one.
हाँ, तो फिर अब ये गंगोत्रियां हैं, तो यहाँ पर जाके मत्था टेको.
Yeah, so there is then Canada pension.
Yes,
and
Canada pension है, GIC of Singapore, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Singapore. Even in Canada, well, Canada pension plan, people know there are so many others, you know, equally large. There is something called the Ontario Teachers
Yes.
system. So it's essentially long-term retirement pension savings in markets which are developed.
And
where
hence,
there is a lot of
and since they are long-term investors, they have the ability to invest in illiquid asset classes.
correct. See, what I do, what you mentioned earlier, alternate assets, for example. When you look at the
Yeah, so
portfolio,
just define this for us. What is alternate
so
asset?
alternate asset is, the way I define it is that anything which is not listed equity
Okay.
or listed debt. Why? Because it's easily liquidatable. There are some forms and shapes of hedge funds which are also categorized as alternate. We'll keep that aside for a moment. Which means that we go and invest in situations or securities which are not easily tradable, listable, easily liquidatable. So there is something called liquidities. आज आप शेयर खरीदते हो, अगर लिक्विड काउंटर है, कल सुबह जाके एक बटन दबाया बेच सकते हो.
Correct.
The investment that we do, हम वो नहीं कर सकते.
Okay.
फॉर एग्जाम्पल रियल एस्टेट फंड में हमने जाके पूरा बिल्डिंग खरीद लिया, उस पर से हमको रेंट आ रहा है वगैरह जो भी है. अगर उस बिल्डिंग को बेचना चाहूँ तो एक दिन में तो नहीं होने वाला है.
Yeah.
वो प्रोसेस इटसेल्फ 7-8 महीने लगता है.
Yeah.
खरीदने के लिए भी उतना टाइम लगता है. सो दैट इज वन एस्पेक्ट ऑफ इट. या फिर देर आर अदर सिचुएशंस, फॉर एग्जाम्पल कोई स्ट्रेस्ड कंपनी है, एंड इफ दैट स्ट्रेस्ड कंपनी रिक्वायर्स मनी, यू हैव टू, यू नो, create a custom made solution of equity, debt, etc. which
Yeah,
we go
and also essentially a plan for turning around that company.
plan for turning around. Then you have
Capital
to
is
really,
just one part of it.
correct. So there is a lot more work to make sure that your money comes back and comes back with the appropriate return.
Okay.
And so I would say all of these are, and private equity, which most people understand, is again illiquid. You have invested in an unlisted company. You are hoping that the listing will happen.
Yeah.
And if the public markets are not conducive, then the listing can get delayed. Like for example, in India, I was speaking to SEBI, there are lots of funds which have come through the end of the fund life. Matlab 6 or 7 years was the original intended fund life, that has come through. But many of the investments that those funds have done, उनका IPO नहीं हुआ या sale नहीं हुआ, for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
That becomes, and that's the risk in this business. So you have to be able to make sure that you invest in the right place, and you have to make sure that at the right time you should be able to exit also.
So you mentioned that you started with the first real estate fund. So that would have been how large then?
In 2006, 2005-6, it was a $100 million fund, but that was raised mostly from domestic institutions.
$100 million, so rupee then would have
उस
been.
टाइम पे तो 450 करोड़.
45-50 was rupee, so it was 4.5.
For 457 odd
500
crores, it was the number at that
500
time.
crore. And what will be the AUM that your company would be managing now?
Now it is close to $9 billion.
Wow.
About
And rupee-
72,000 crores.
And rupee is at 80. So 70,000 crores. So 500 crore to 72,000 crore in
Yeah.
less than 20 years.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
If only you were a listed company.
I know. I wish I was.
Great. And now I think the company has also diversified from real estate into various other strategies
Yeah.
also, right?
Yeah.
So what all, just to
So
give
we
a
do real
flavor-
estate. Even within real estate, there are various shades of investments that we do. Real estate credit we do. Then real estate office assets, where we own and operate office assets. Then the data centers, sometimes people think it is real estate, sometimes people think it is infrastructure. So we have a data center fund, which we do. Then we have this, strategic situations fund, which is very flexible capital to companies which can take debt, equity, part of debt, part of equity, combination of those kind of investments in both listed companies and unlisted companies we do. That's, so the real estate itself is all of these put together was what I mentioned was nearly about $4.2 billion. Then strategic situation is about $2.6 billion. Data center is $800 million. And then private equity.
Yeah.
We have an early stage private equity fund which we have now fully invested. Now, the next thing that we see in private equity is there are a whole bunch of companies where there is going to be a generational shift in corporate ownership. तो आप लोग, all of you are young tech guys, you know what's going on. The next generation not interested in daddy's business, but that business can be a good business, can be owned by funds, grown, and there is a lot of interesting opportunities that is coming up in that space.
No, and in fact, globally also, that's how large part of corporate ownership actually went away from promoters and into professional.
It will become
entrepreneurs.
professional, correct. India will go through the same phase.
Yeah, because I think, yes, you're right, that generational change in corporate ownership is happening, and yeah, it's true. And just for people to understand that these are like very fancy terms, private equity and strategic situations, etc. And there is a lot of what should I say, euphoria, especially among young professionals, to be a part of this kind of a setup. So what does it take for someone to be a part of this kind of a setup where you can be part of an investment team or be a fund manager over a period? So do you necessarily need to be from top Ivy League colleges, or do you look for some specific skill sets, or what kind of a persona you are looking for when you are hiring people in your team?
Well, the best simple answer that I can give you, I'm not from an Ivy League college myself.
Okay.
So, look, I think going to the best of colleges, getting the best of education is just one part of a professional's growth. For every CEO of a company or a successful entrepreneur who may have come out of some of these best known education institutions, equally there will be other examples of people who are equally successful or achievers who may not necessarily be from those kind of. So what's really important, at least as far as this business I have seen is concerned, is you need to be able to have a longer term view of where a particular business or a company can go. So it is not about कि next quarter में क्या होगा और या उसके अगले quarter में क्या होगा. Second, if you are a professional who understands macro, what do I mean by macro? देश में क्या हो रहा है, भूलोग में क्या हो रहा है, पॉलिटिक्स में क्या हो रहा है, इकोनॉमिक्स में क्या हो रहा है, डोमेस्टिक इकोनॉमिक्स में क्या हो रहा है, इंटरनेशनल इकोनॉमिक्स में क्या हो रहा है, एंड इन सबको अगर एक if you are able to put it all together in your head and connect the dots, that is the most important skill. It is the important skill to understand what I should put my money so that I can make money in future. It is also an important skill to understand what I should not put my money. Avoiding mistakes is equally important than making an investment.
So it's not just those big fancy Excel sheets, huge 50 MB files that you have to make. It's much beyond.
It is part of the process. But किस चीज का Excel sheet बनाना है, वो भी तो पहले तय करना पड़ेगा ना, हर चीज का तो नहीं बना सकते.
और कौन से वेरिएबल्स हैं एंड
Correct. I'll give you an example. Today there is a very famous case of a very large education company which is in courts and litigation. Right?
yeah.
The biggest and the best of investors are there in that company, but we all know what has happened to that company. Right? But if you look at it, there are many people who have avoided investing in that company. Why did they avoid? So whose decision is right?
And there will be inverse calls
Education
also.
was the hottest sector at that time.
Yeah,
तो कुछ लोगों ने उसको ना भी बोला है.
correct. And Srini, reverse भी है, मतलब there some people would have not invested in certain companies who
हो
which
सकता
would
है.
have become multi-baggers.
Correct, वो तो होगा ही. The mistakes will happen on both sides. But if you are running a fund, and the mathematics is simple, if you lose all the money, 10% of your fund, if you are lost, it's impossible to really make a good return on the entire fund. Very, very difficult.
And a typical
If
fund,
10% of the money goes to zero, it's very hard to catch back.
and typically a fund will have, I mean, I'm sure there's no set rule to it, but typically one fund will have how many investments?
So generally we don't invest more than 10% of a fund, but in 10% is also an exception, right? That's the internal norm that we use. So I would imagine in most funds we'll have probably between 14 and 16 investments.
Oh, which means
So
one and a
roughly
half investments going bad and that fund is done.
yeah, it'll become, unless you have a jackpot in something else.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's very hard.
But that jackpot also once in a while only it will
Correct,
happen.
it's very hard. So jackpot theory works in venture capital. You put in 100 rupees, it can become 1 lakh rupees, right? But that's also because in venture capital funds you will see a lot of investments.
So
It is a spreading of the risk.
So is it fair for me to say that in general alternate assets are taking higher risk versus public equities, because A, obviously there is no liquidity, but B, also because there is this concentration which you carry.
Of course, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The one difference I would say is that in public equities, you can sometimes panic and sell out too early,
Yeah.
right?
Happens all the time with me.
In private equity, you may not have the ability to sell out even if you panic.
Yeah.
So it can actually work in your favor
No,
for compounding money.
So Srini, it's a very good analogy, similar analogy. One of my ex-bosses used to give me why houses are such great investments, because daily basis पे उसका price ऊपर नीचे हो नहीं रहा है. So even if
हो
the
भी रहा है तो
prices-
आपको पता नहीं है.
So even if the prices fall and you are not selling, so and let's say price goes up, तो it's not that कि एक room आप उसमें add कर लोगे.
Correct.
So since you stay with the investment for such a long period of time, eventually you end up making money.
Correct.
And that's how, let's say, real estate or gold, they are favored, because in general, again, households, they are, when they're buying gold, they
No,
don't
but you know,
sell.
there is on real estate, I'll tell you, it is actually a myth that you make a lot of money.
Okay. Why is
I'll
that?
give you a simple example. You know, there are 2-3 common stories that people hear in real estate. My father bought this land
Yeah.
at 10,000 rupees. Right?
Yeah. अभी तो 10 लाख का हो गया.
शहर इतना बड़ा हो गया कि अभी तो जमीन शहर के पास आ गई या शहर जमीन के पास आ गई. 10,000 rupees is now worth 1 crore. 1 करोड़ रुपए का जमीन हो गया. दिस इज व्हाट पीपल से कि अरे वाह क्या क्या इन्वेस्टमेंट किया है. अरे भाई, आपके फादर ने जब ही वाज 20 years old तब इन्वेस्ट किया था. उसके होके 40 साल हो गए. आप मैथ्स करके देख लो कितना परसेंटेज रिटर्न आया. सेम थिंग व्हेन यू बाई अ होम. मैंने बैंड्रा में घर खरीदा. ठीक है. जब आप तो 15-20 साल हो गया, आपने उसको बेच दिया. सपोज 1 करोड़ में खरीदा, आपने 8 करोड़ में बेच दिया. 1 करोड़ का 8 करोड़ रुपया हो गया. आपके दिमाग में तो यही चल रहा है ना. बट 1 करोड़ का 8 करोड़ रुपया
In 20 years.
इन 20 years ओनली 14% रिटर्न. प्लस उस पर अगर आप वहां पर रह रहे हो तो आप मेंटेनेंस भर रहे थे हर क्वार्टर पे.
Yes. Yeah.
बिजली, पानी, रिपेयर, मेंटेनेंस सब.
Yeah.
तो वो सब घटा दो. फिर उसके बाद जब बेचोगे उस पर तो टैक्स भी भरा होगा. तो नेट पोस्ट टैक्स रिटर्न क्या है? वो बड़ा इसलिए लगता है बिकॉज यू आर सीइंग अ मल्टीपल इफेक्ट ऑन योर मनी, नंबर 1. एंड नंबर 2, 9 out of 10 cases when you bought the house, you did not put all of the money yourself. Suppose 1 करोड़ में आपने घर खरीदा तो आपने तो 20 लाख रुपए डाले होंगे, 80 लाख रुपए लोन लिया होगा. ओवर टाइम आपने लोन भर दिया, जो कि मतलब आपके SIP की तरह जा रहा है, आपको पता भी नहीं चल रहा है। ठीक है, आपको SIP में आजकल यही लगता है ना कि 6 साल पहले शुरू किया SIP, वो कटे जा रहा है, कटे जा रहा है, कटे जा रहा है, 5 साल के बाद देखा अरे इतना बड़ा पैसा हो गया। वही इफेक्ट है कि जब आपका 80 लाख रुपए आपने जब बोरो किया, 10 साल के बाद वो जीरो हो गया, समझो 15 साल वो जीरो हो गया। और जब आपने 8 करोड़ रुपए बेचा, आपको 80 लाख तो दे दिया, तो 8 करोड़ के 8 करोड़ आपके पास आ गए। तो मतलब आपने 20 लाख रुपए लगाए अपने,
एंड ओवर अ पीरियड
और 8 करोड़ रुपया कमाए। तो दिस इज कॉल्ड लेवर्ड रिटर्न। आप F&O मार्केट में यही कर रहे हो आज, लेकिन 15 साल के लिए नहीं कर सकते हो।
15 मिनट के लिए होता है,
15 मिनट के लिए होता है।
No, correct. And Srini, so this I understood how this market functions. But this interplay between what you do and where most of us as retail investors, when we are investing in mutual funds or we are investing in direct equities, so this interplay only happens when the companies that you are investing in, they are coming with an IPO. That's how I will get a peek into what you are doing, right? Otherwise, this interplay doesn't happen. Okay, got it. So this is clear what you do. So now let me go back to the first point of your fabulous journey of 30 plus years. So again, since I know Srini, I always remember that one story of how you were involved in the Maruti IPO, right? And I remember that story. Why I must also tell you, it was start of my personal investment journey. So I was in college then. That was the first time in my life I had opened a demat account to invest in a Maruti IPO. I'm forgetting the numbers exactly now, but if I remember correctly, the share price was some 80 or 90 rupees or something like that. And it went up to 150 rupees, and I was so happy, and I sold it. And I was so happy.
If you had kept it now, it is up 70 times.
You know, that's what. So this is the beautiful power of staying invested. And obviously I was in college, I don't know how much money I had, maybe some few thousand rupees, और उसका मैंने कुछ 2-4-5,000 रुपए बनाया होगा, उसका क्या किया होगा I don't know, but had I just kept it with me, it would have been a good handsome amount. So you started as an investment banker, right?
Correct.
And the primary job of investment banker in those days was to do IPOs.
Yeah, there are two kinds, I would say. Well, you know, since we started that, I started in 1990. Most people don't know, at least certainly your generation would not know, that the government of India used to decide at what price a company can go public.
Is it?
Yes.
Why?
There is something called the Controller of Capital Issues of India.
Okay.
CCI.
Okay.
दिल्ली में आपने अपने कंपनी का IPO करना है, तो सबसे पहले तो एक एप्लीकेशन भरो, उसमें पूरा फाइनेंशियल्स डालो, फिर इसका वैल्यूएशन करो, ये करो, एंड देन यू गो टू द मिनिस्ट्री.
Okay.
Ministry will take its own sweet time, and they will decide what is there was a formula on the basis of which they will decide at what price your company can go public.
Taking time is fine, but how can someone else decide at what price?
That is how it was. It was called Controller of Capital Issues. See, we were still coming out of the socialist era. Everything is controlled in this country.
So this was pre-liberalization, I think.
Pre-liberalization. So this is how it was all the time, right? And there are lots of benefits to controlling capital, so to speak, in some form or the other. The collateral damage of that एक अलग story जो है, भारत सरकार ने decide कर लिया था, उससे पहले I'm talking mid-70s की बात है, कि multinationals have to dilute their shares in India. या किसी को बेचना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि
that's how Coke and IBM they went back.
Coke and IBM तो वापस चले गए.
Yeah.
But आज अगर आप हिंदुस्तान लीवर का शेयर खरीद सकते हो, because of that. Castrol का शेयर खरीद सकते हो because of that.
Because they stayed back.
Because then they said कि the only way I can dilute my ownership and I still run a business in India without having interfering shareholders is to I'll sell it in the public.
Yeah.
So that is how all these multinationals in the past got listed. They did not list in India because they wanted to list.
They were forced to list.
They were at some level forced to list.
Actually,
it's a very different situation than what we are going to see next week.
That's what I'm saying.
When a company like Hyundai is going to list because they want to list.
Such a phenomenal transformation. Yes, it has taken 50 years maybe, but a company like Hyundai, out of their own free will, no one is forcing them to list, but they want to list because India is such a great market.
Yeah.
So
no, also remember, Hyundai actually, most of the money is actually going back to the parent because they are having challenges in their own balance sheet.
Okay.
But the fact is that multinationals wanting to list in India, with Hyundai coming in and several others in the pipeline, is a great testament to life cycle has come full.
Yeah, correct.
And many private equity investors are learning the lessons of advising promoters of Indian startups कि भाई आप सिंगापुर में कंपनी स्टार्ट कर लो या अमेरिका में स्टार्ट कर लो. Now what are they doing?
No, they are
trying
coming
to
back,
reverse
yeah.
flip and
Yes,
come and
yes.
list it in
Yeah,
India,
yeah.
thanks to the listing of people like Zomato and others.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's a fabulous journey that on one hand you have someone like a Hyundai, like absolutely old economy, solid, large, very large company, and you have all these new age startups, and both of them kind of competing for the same capital, for my money actually, right?
Yep.
Because ultimately it's
Correct.
me and people like us who are investing in these companies. So amazing, awesome. No, anyway, you were talking about CCI, then then it got
So then
liberalized.
1992, after the security scam happened, that's when SEBI came.
Okay.
But at that time,
Okay, so you predate SEBI actually.
I predate SEBI. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. SEBI came and then they allowed what is called free pricing, where they say company and its shareholders can decide at what price the IPO can happen. And interestingly, one of the first ever free priced IPO was done by me
Okay.
back then.
Okay.
And then much later in 1997 thereabouts, they came. तो आजकल जो book building करते हैं ना, book built IPO.
Yeah.
That came in 1997-98. So the first book built IPO was done by a company called Hughes Software.
Okay.
That was also done by us.
Okay. Great.
So, and then of course one of the big government divestment, Maruti divestment, was a folklore story.
Yeah. No, anyway, I mean, Kotak's leadership in IPOs, it has been kind of unchallenged for almost 25-30 years now.
Yeah.
We've always
But we
been-
didn't start like that. We were a Johnny come lately. We were,
Okay.
our other competitors are much ahead of us. But the fun part of being part of the journey was that we were the underdogs. There were 2 or 3 other larger players who had the corporate network, corporate connectivity. I remember at that time Mr. Kotak was also very young, right? And so we were all, I was 27 and he was 32, and we were not some big connected people in the market that we knew everybody. We had to fight our way, make our connections, find our way into the boardroom. See, IPO, M&A is all a boardroom decision.
Yeah.
So if you don't have access to the boardroom, you're not going to be successful. To get access to the boardroom when you're a young upstart.
I was 32 many years back actually now, who would have allowed me to enter a boardroom. But
So you have to find your way to do it and find a connect and be smart about how to do it. But it was good fun. So, and then when you have 2 or 3 entrenched competitors and you have to fight for every bit of market share, there is fun in doing that. And so I enjoyed that part.
no,
and
and
perhaps
that's how great companies are built. That's how Kotak was built.
yeah, so we were those scrappy fighters in those days. Now we are a big bang, ye wo sab thing, but in those days that was what we were. And by 2005, 2006, we were become a very large investment bank, etc. Maybe at some level the the scrappy fighter was still in me, so I was getting a little bored in being a reasonably established investment bank. So let's go back to the beginning and start something. So that's how it alternate assets started.
Great. Okay, so maybe we'll change track a little bit. So Srini, you mentioned you interact with who's who of the world now, right? Biggest money allocators, fund allocators in the world, whether it is from Middle East, whether it is from US, Singapore. So you're covering the entire globe. Is there someone from Japan also?
Yeah.
There's someone from Japan. So yes, the entire globe is covered. When these large, super savvy investors, they are making this ultra long-term illiquid calls, right? So if they are giving money to you, you are telling them upfront that minimum 7 to 8 years, I will not give you money back, and maybe, God forbid, something goes wrong, then it goes up to 10, 12 years also, right? How do they make these decisions? At a country/economy level, that how much money to give to India, how much money to give to, let's say, Malaysia or Singapore, wherever. And then within that, how do we decide that to give to Srini or to, let's say, Rohit, who also starts a fund? So these two decisions, how do they make?
No, I think all global funds obviously have a macro view of how the world is going to work, and they are always betting on the future of the world. And so a lot of things have to fall into place for them to allocate capital specifically to India. See, a lot of funds can easily get their India exposure through Asia fund. If there is a well-known investment manager goes and says, I've got an Asia real estate investment strategy or Asia credit investment strategy, And within the Asia, I will be investing in India, Singapore, Malaysia. Some people will take the view कि okay, this is easier. At least India में कुछ गड़बड़ हो गया तो इधर invest कर लेगा, उधर कुछ गड़बड़ हो गया. So if easier decision for investors is to first take a decision, I want to invest international. Then take a decision which part of the world do you want to. It could be Europe, it could be Asia. Then take a decision who to give that money to, right? So the funnel is, if let's say a large pension fund out of America decides that I want to invest 20% of my money outside America.
Okay.
I'm just hypothetical example. Then that 20% has to be, you start cutting down. Which part? Suppose he says, okay, 20% I will break it down between 10% to Europe and 10% to Asia. So in Asia में 10% ही आया. Then within 10% in Asia, I'll say, no, China is the biggest economy in Asia, so I'll probably do 3% in China. So 3% gone there, 7% is left for the rest of Asia, right? And then you will say Asia, Australasia. So finally, funnel में India के लिए जो the money that comes is a very small fraction of that, but because the amount is so large that even that fraction is meaningful for the.
Okay.
But to be able to convince them to do one, invest specifically only in India, because that's what we do, India strategies, and invest with us. The biggest hurdles to cross are, first, they should be prepared to invest in a single country risk. And second, they should be prepared to invest in a fund manager out of India who for them is an unknown fund manager. Kotak may be a big name here in India. But when I started raising money, nobody knew us. It was almost like starting back to 1991, 92. You go to some of the big pension funds and all, you have to start from the beginning. I am from India, my office is here in Bombay, this is how the map of India looks like. And I am such and such company now. So you start from there.
And obviously you have to keep on following.
You have to keep on doing that. Otherwise, everybody
एक बार
looks,
में तो कौन देता
एक
है
बार में, you can't make an impression in one.
Okay. And the distinction, I think one big distinction that I would want to make is that you are an India-grown, India-focused fund. So you are based out of India, investing only in India versus, let's say, some of the global names, let's say a BlackRock or a Blackstone or a KKR, which are global firms.
Yeah.
Some part of the money that they have, they are investing in India. I don't think any of these global firms have an India-focused, India identity.
To the best of my knowledge, no.
They don't have. So
though they may invest whatever 60-70% of some strategy into India.
Yeah. So that is the big distinction, I think, when you are approaching them.
Yeah. So for me and for us, the focus was always India. That's what we know. That is our core competency.
Yeah.
And therefore we will play to our core competency.
Yeah. And over a period, obviously now you have better relationships with most of them. But in general, what's the sentiment? Is it like a little more conducive when a new fund manager, let's say, will now go and approach, or they will have the same problem?
See, all investor behavior is the same everywhere, right? If you have treated their money with respect and you have generated returns for them, they'll keep on giving you money.
So repeat businesses.
It is the same with domestic fund manager. आपको कोई portfolio manager पसंद आया, उसने return अच्छा दिया, आप उसको वापस दोगे पैसा. Same thing with the mutual fund. It is the same story there as well. With regard to current sentiment, there is a positive sentiment for India. Whatever the government has done over the last 10, 12 years in terms of infrastructure, policies, etc., has been extremely good, well received in the international markets. And there is greater inquisitiveness about what they should and could do in India. Otherwise, India is still not what I call as a separate country allocation decision yet.
Okay.
China got there sometime in 2014-15. So we are 10 years behind China.
Okay. Okay, since you mentioned China, I think this I will take as the last track of our conversation is current state of markets. Let me start with China, right? So suddenly something has happened and in the last 1 month, from being the worst performing market, China has become the best performing market in the world, right? And obviously public listed market investors, they have to be slightly more nimble footed because they have to show returns on a daily basis almost. and some allocation. And today I was reading some reports, some brokerage houses have upgraded China, right? So some money is moving
In the
to
public
China.
market will move to China.
It is
Yes.
moving to China, and over the last maybe couple of weeks or so. So today is 7th October when we are chatting. We have seen about a little bit correction, maybe about 5,000 point correction we've seen in Sensex, and obviously there will be various reasons to it. But one reason which people are attributing is this sudden rise of China, and will now FIIs or global investors, will they prefer China
Yeah.
over India? So I just wanted to pick your brain on, do you think this is temporary, or this is something which will just passes by, or this is actually something more permanent or fundamental which China is trying to do?
I don't think this is a sort of a major shift in favor of China.
Okay.
This is not a course correction for China. This is I would say a technical correction. Something's become very cheap, and there has been some stimulus that has come, and therefore it has to get reflected in the prices. Because if you look at what is fundamentally the difference between now China and India, I would say that in China, entrepreneurs don't want to be seen to be billionaires.
Yeah, there has been a lot of crackdown.
The moment you become a millionaire, billionaire, you come in the government cracks down.
Yeah.
What does it do to the psychology of entrepreneurs who want to build great companies,
Yeah.
who want to build great businesses?
Yeah.
It goes back to the era in India where being a rich and successful business was a negative.
Yeah. Correct. Versus what's happening in
The
India.
moment you change that, it started in 91, but the real impact of that happened only 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Ki businessmen building businesses and becoming wealthy is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Once that happened, look at the mindset change in how entrepreneurship flourished in India.
Yeah.
That is where China is going backwards. That is one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is in geopolitics.
Yeah.
Capital allocation decisions to China are currently pretty challenged. So, to my mind, this is more of a temporary phenomenon.
Okay. And so you're saying that long-term capital allocation decisions are taken over long-term. So it's not that some policy
Yeah.
changes, some stimulus has come, and
Correct.
suddenly people.
Because
will
there
say-
are lots of index funds here.
Yeah.
They get benchmarked on ki yesterday ka NAV kya tha, aaj kya hai.
Yeah.
So you will have to keep balancing it and go with the flow of the market.
Yeah. And some of the, I think, demographics is something which is, I personally spend a lot of time kind of reading about. I think some of these mega trends which are irreversible, right? So last year China actually had a first time decline in population.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can build factories, but who's going to run them? So
Correct.
so some of these mega trends, I don't know how they.
Which is what I said in the beginning, that you have to be able to connect the dots. And these dots are not about today and tomorrow. It's about what you do. I'm in the business where I have to take a call for 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to connect the
You have
dots.
to get the
you have to
mega
bet on
trends.
some of the mega trends, right?
Yeah.
For example, a couple of years ago, out of our strategic situation fund, before data centers became a fashionable word, we invested in data centers. Because today everybody wants to put mega amounts of money in data centers in India. We had done that 2.5 years ago. So that's the mega trend. I mean, if India is going to be such a digital economy, it is like saying, the maximum number of passengers are going to travel by train in India, but patri nahi hai. तो कहाँ से train में जाएगा?
Correct.
Data center is that digital patri
Yeah.
on the back of which everything has to run.
Yeah. Great. So I think we are at time. One last point again, I'll like to pick your brain on. You just mentioned mega trends, right? So we are seeing again this one big mega trend playing out in India, which is how people are moving away from traditional avenues of investing or saving towards newer avenues. I think it is manifested in the way our demat folios are growing, or mutual fund folios are growing, mutual fund AUMs are growing, and people are willing to experiment with newer platforms. For example, Kotak Cherry is one such platform, and we've been blessed that we are part of Kotak Group, but still ultimately it is investors' money, and they have to kind of, they should be willing to invest through us, with us, etc. Why do you think this mega trend is playing out where people are moving out of, in general, India, which is a very risk averse kind of a country, moving out of safe assets and willing to experiment in riskier asset classes, equity being one of them. F&O you spoke about, but let's keep that out for a moment. But equities in general, what has been the reason why the household balance sheet is seeing such a big shift from gold and fixed deposits to equity and mutual funds also?
I think the first thing is accessibility and the ability to experience.
Okay.
See, when a customer experience is poor in any product or service, he is not going to try it again. Right? But digital enabling of investment in the markets and the ease with which a customer can actually do that has made it that much better. Up, gold का बात किया आपने. When investors or when households go and buy gold, traditionally, what was the way in which they were buying gold?
Go to a jeweler.
Go to a jeweler.
Yeah.
और ज्वेलर क्या है? वो मेरे मदर के ज़माने से वही ज्वेलर है.
Absolutely.
मेरे फादर के ज़माने से वही ज्वेलर है. वो रिलेशनशिप है, वो उनको नाम से बुलाएगा, चाय पिलाएगा, उसको बोला आज नया डिज़ाइन आया है, उनको लगता है कि क्या मेरे को सर्विस दे रहा है, देखो मेरे को देख के मेरे को पहचाना उसने. इट इज़ दैट एम्पैथी दैट, बट टुडे दैट कंजम्पशन हैज मूव्ड टू तनिष्क, where the customer experience is of a slightly different nature. It is not that personal, but at the same time you have the comfort of brand, quality, assurance, timely delivery. आप तनिष्क में जाके खरीदो, बस इसमें मिलावट नहीं होगा.
Variety, store sizes.
So it is the customer experience that may change it. So whether it is Cherry and its fantastic customer experience that people can have, it's so smooth to sort of transact, get onboarded, and many other such this thing, and the digitization of the financial markets, whether it is demat account, whether it is settlement that we have got, all of this has all come together in the last few years to make the public market investment a very easy journey to do so. And let's not forget, and I've been in the market for a very long time. Mutual fund sahi hai, or mutual funds is everybody is investing in mutual fund has happened in the last 8 or 9 years. But the mutual fund industry suffered for nearly 13 to 14 years because the first mutual fund IPO was sold as if it was some company IPO. Mutual fund का कंपनी की तरह पॉप नहीं होता है, बट उसको बेचा गया वैसे था. You may not remember this. The first mutual fund IPO which was sold like any other frenzy of Swiggy, Zomato was Morgan Stanley mutual fund IPO. लोगों ने पागल की तरह उसमें पैसा डाला, थिंकिंग अगले दिन सुबह 10 गुना हो जाएगा. नहीं होता है. So experience. So once steady.
So this is access. What explains the change in risk behavior of investors?
I think we have crossed at a average household level. While we say that $2,500 is our GDP per capita, that is a certain misnomer because in our country 1% of the population pays the majority of the taxes, but the number is very large in absolute terms. So the population with a disposable income is a very sizable population, and that GDP, that per capita income is actually much higher, which means that their basic needs are already taken care of. Whether it is their current housing needs, food needs, they are already taken care of. Now they are looking for better experiences, they are looking for better avenues, and they feel कि yes, घर तो है अपना, गोल्ड तो मम्मी ने लेके रखा हुआ है, why should I go and do this? And the younger generation, I have 2 daughters, they're not interested in jewelry. What will I do? In a traditional way, my wife would have gone and every year gone and bought some gold and kept it कि शादी में देंगे. My children are not interested in that.
Correct.
So what do? You put it in the markets, and you at least preserve wealth and grow the wealth, and you also see the wealth creation both in the public markets as well as the entrepreneurship.
Correct.
And communication. There are so many forms of learning about what's going on. आप मोबाइल में कर सकते हो, यूट्यूब में कर सकते हो.
So essentially, is it like lot of things coming together at the same time? So it's information arbitrage has gone away, access arbitrage has gone away, in general income levels.
While arbitrages have gone away, the same accesses today are also enticing people through frauds.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful about something is coming to you too easy.
Yeah.
something that looks too good to be true
No,
is
it's never
probably
true.
not true.
It is never it is true. So great. So I think we are at time. One question we always ask everyone, so you also have to answer that how do you manage your personal portfolio in terms of asset allocation? How does it look like? I won't ask your age since you mentioned that you want to sound young, but still about so let's keep the house aside in terms of investable wealth.
Mostly it is in public markets, which is in mutual funds. And I invest my personal capital in the funds that I manage.
Okay.
So a lot of my my personal wealth is also on my alternate assets in different strategies, in real
Skin in the
estate,
game.
in credit, skin in the game. That is very much there. Then we don't, in our alternative assets, we don't have a couple of strategies. Like for example, we don't yet have a venture capital fund. So I have invested in somebody else's venture capital fund because I think it's a good way.
But
to
largely, you'd be what, equity oriented?
I am by nature more of an equity oriented person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Though some, if I went to a portfolio manager and showed my portfolio, they would say, "आपके पास debt बहुत कम है, at your age you should probably do
I
a
was
little
about
bit
to
more
ask.
debt."
About to ask.
I felt, well, I did listen to that, and I said, okay, let me see what to do about it, and I wanted to also check whether going and buying a bond directly from RBI under the RBI retail bond platform is something. How is the experience? And I must say it's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I could register myself. The journey was fantastic to buy a retail bond directly from RBI. It's I think so. Again, experience, access, and experience.
Yeah. Great. So on that happy note, we'll see you again, and may your AUM flourish and may your company flourish.
And may the cherry on top be on everybody's mind.
Thank you.
Top
so
of
much.
mind.
Thank you.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.